So my story begins with me at age 31, coming to out of a blackout. I was nauseous, I was sweating profusely, shaking uncontrollably, confused about my whereabouts, and as I slowly sort of gathered my senses together, I realized that I was in Portland. But I was not at the World Domination Summit, unfortunately. I was at a different kind of institution, an institution called rehab. Now, this was not the life plan, I can tell you that. I was somebody who started out with a lot of promise. I was the kid who graduated at the top of my class in high school. I got into every college I applied to, Harvard, Princeton. I went on to Stanford, where I was a member of the legendary Stanford swimming program. I was a world-class swimmer. Somehow I squeaked my way through Cornell Law School, and yet here I was in rehab. This is not supposed to happen to a guy like me. But addiction does not discriminate. It doesn't matter who you are, it doesn't matter how much stuff you have, it doesn't matter how important you think you are. As a matter of fact, there is an article in today's New York Times. It's called The Addict, The Lawyer, the Addict. It is the #1 trending story on NewYorkTimes.com today. And it is the story of a very high-powered Silicon Valley attorney who died of a heroin overdose. This is a problem that is an epidemic in our culture. But here I am in rehab, wondering how I got here. And I got here because I had been living as an alcoholic for a very long time. To give you a quick picture of what it looked like at the end, by the time I was 30 years old, I was a round-the-clock drinker. It was not unusual for me to start the day with a vodka tonic in the shower in the morning, sneak drinks throughout the day, lie to everybody around me about this crazy secret life that I was living, including myself. And at the very end, addiction had robbed me of all of my aspirations. It had decimated my potential, destroyed my life, and really broke my soul. Broke my soul until I was this unemployable, untrustworthy shell of a human being, unable to live and hoping to die. And as I was in this rehab, a place where I lived for 100 days, which is a very long time to be in rehab, as I kind of detoxed out of my state, I remember a counselor coming up to me and he had a question for me. And he said, "Rich, are you a human being having a spiritual experience, or are you a spiritual being having a human experience?" And I said, "What? Like, I don't understand the question. I don't know how to answer it because I don't get it at all." And it's taken me a very long time, but now I'm very clear on the fact that I am indeed a spiritual being having a human experience. And this is the lens through which I perceive the world and live my life today. And that experience of rehab saved my life. It gave me a toolbox, some spiritual principles on which to create a new foundation for how to live. And as I made my way back into the world, I was successful in repairing my life. By my late 30s, I had a very successful career. I was on the partnership track at a prestigious law firm in Los Angeles. I was building a family. I was living in a really nice house. I had a fancy sports car in the driveway. And yet at the same time, I had overlooked a couple crucial key things about how I was living. The most important thing that I had overlooked was my health and well-being. By the time I was 39 years old, I was 50 pounds overweight, classic couch potato, chubby couch potato, lazy guy hurtling into middle age. And at the same time, on the inside, perhaps more importantly, I was dying. I was depressed, I was unenthusiastic about this life that I'd worked so hard to recreate after that rehab experience, and really disillusioned with this professional career that I had never really put that much thought into figuring out whether it was what I really even wanted to do. And so I was having this existential crisis, this spiritual crisis about my place in the world. And on the evening before my 40th birthday, this existential crisis collided with a health scare. I was walking up a simple flight of stairs to go to bed late one night when I had to pause halfway up. I was winded, I was out of breath, tightness in my chest, buckled over, sweat on my brow, and really fear in my heart. Once again, something was very, very wrong in how I was living my life. And as I was confused, I was wondering, how did I get here? How did this happen to me? The good news is that I realized I was not alone, because illnesses related to nutrition have claimed more lives than all the world wars combined. We live in the most prosperous nation on earth, and yet we've never been more sick as a society. Right now, obesity, 50% of Americans are obese or overweight. Heart disease, America's #1 killer. 1 out of every 3 people will die of heart disease. And diabetes, by 2030, they're predicting that 50% of Americans will be diabetic or pre-diabetic. These are the true epidemics of our era. And it's bankrupting our economy. Right now, 75% of all healthcare costs are attributable to these illnesses. And the thing that is so ironic, the thing that just breaks my heart, is that 80 to 90% of these conditions are preventable, are curable, in many ways, in many cases, reversible through some pretty simple diet and lifestyle alterations. Now, me on the staircase, I didn't know any of that. I was just wheezing and confused and wondering, like, how did I get to this place? Well, I got there because I've been living my life like most Americans, sedentary, stressed, and subsisting on what I like to call the window diet. Does anybody know what the window diet is? The window diet is my favorite diet. The window diet is when you drive your car up to a fine dining establishment, you roll the window down, and they hand you food, right? Now, I don't know about you guys, but I love this stuff. This is how I ate throughout my adolescence and most of my adult life. I loved it, even though I knew intellectually that it was killing me. Because despite my struggles with drugs and alcohol, in my case, food is, always has been, and probably always will be my first drug of choice. My first drug of choice. And as I'm there on the staircase, my next thought turned to this guy, Richard Spindle. This is my grandfather on my mother's side. He is my namesake. We look a little bit alike. I call him my doppelganger. And much like me, Richard Spindle had been a champion swimmer in his youth. In fact, he was captain of the University of Michigan swim team in the late 1920s. He was an Olympic hopeful. He held an American record. He was a contemporary of the great swimming talents of his era, like Johnny Weissmuller, who went on to star as Tarzan on the silver screen. In later years, he became a pillar of his community. He was never overweight. He never smoked. He stayed fit, swimming in Lake Michigan. And yet by age 54, decades before I ever had a chance to meet him, he died from America's #1 killer, heart disease. As I thought about him, I realized in that moment that if I didn't make some pretty serious, substantive, and decisive changes in how I was living my life, that I was headed in his direction, and I was probably headed there a lot faster than him, because there was no Jack in the Box in his era. I thought, what am I going to do? I had gone to rehab for drugs and alcohol, and now, at least metaphorically, I needed to go to rehab for food. I made that decision. The changes weren't overnight, and they weren't linear, and they weren't perfect, but ultimately I arrived at this place of wondering, what would happen if I got rid of all the animal products on my plate? No eggs, no dairy, no fish, no cheese, no meat whatsoever, and all the processed food as well. This was going to be like my detox experience from food. Now, bear in mind, I wasn't sure that this was going to have any impact on how I was feeling physically. In fact, the truth is, I didn't really want it to work. It sounded like really terrible, actually. I had visions of crawling around in my yard, like chewing grass out of the front yard. It just sounded awful, like so severe, but I'm an extreme person, as you'll come to know, and I needed an extreme experiment to try to partition to put distance between how I was behaving and how I could perhaps behave in the future. So despite the fact that this sounded like an absolutely horrible idea, I figured a joyless life is better than being dead, so I went ahead with this experiment anyway. And here's a remarkable thing. Within 7 to 10 days of making this switch to what I later discovered was called a whole food plant-based diet, I didn't know that at the time, I felt this extraordinary resurgence in my vitality. Suddenly, my energy levels were through the roof. I was sleeping better. I was able to think more clearly. My mental acuity was improved. Everything about my experience in a very short period of time had changed in a very dramatic fashion. For the first time in as long as I could remember, I actually wanted to move my body physically. I wanted to exercise. I hadn't had that impulse since I had been a swimmer in college. I went back to the pool. I pulled an old dusty pair of running shoes out of the closet, went out jogging a couple times. My wife bought me a bike for my 40th birthday. I'd never really owned a bike. And I started to get outdoors and enjoy nature for the first time in a long time. In very short shrift, a lot of those pounds melted away. I started to feel like myself again. And the biggest experience, the biggest change that I felt was this reconnection with joy by engaging in an activity that had brought me so much happiness as a young person. Now, I had no goals or aspirations to returning to becoming a competitive athlete at the time. My goals were very modest. I just wanted to lose this gut. I wanted to be able to enjoy my kids at their energy level. That was it. But with each successive week that went by, I started to feel better and better. I started to feel fitter. I was just enjoying this process. And it was around this time where a bunch of my friends, a bunch of my lawyer friends would come up to me and they'd be like, "Rich, you look different. You're smiling, you look fit, you lost all this weight, your skin looks great." And I could tell you when your guy friends want to talk about your skin, something weird is going on, right? Very weird. They're like, "What are you doing? What is the secret?" You're like, I'm eating plants? I don't know. And that look of eager anticipation where I was going to tell them the secret would suddenly kind of morph into this look of ashen disappointment. And that would quickly change into this look of grave concern for my well-being. I had a lot of conversations that go something like this. Tell somebody you're going to McDonald's, that's cool. Let's go out for a smoke, awesome. Let's go get drunk, that's even better. But if you tell somebody you're going vegan, you are a baby killer. A baby killer. God forbid. The funny thing is that when I was eating at McDonald's all the time, nobody said anything, nobody cared. And now suddenly I was on this plant-based experiment. All my friends had overnight graduated from nutrition school and had a lot of opinions about how I was living. You're gonna be irresponsible. What are you doing? You're harming your health. This is not good for you. Very, very funny. And these conversations would always culminate in one singular question. Does anybody know what that question is? Where do you get your protein? Where do you get your protein? Bro, where are you getting your protein? Dude, seriously, protein? Where are you getting your protein? I was like, I don't know. I honestly didn't know. And the funny thing, I felt good. I got asked that question so many times that even though I was feeling good and I had all this energy and my skin looked great, I started to think, I'm not getting enough protein. It's insane. But human beings are insane. I could do a 2-hour dissertation on the protein question. I don't have the bandwidth or the time to do that right now, but suffice it to say that there is a lot of misunderstanding about this issue of protein. This idea that if you don't drink a protein shake within minutes of waking up in the morning, you're unable to breathe air into your lungs. It's crazy. Most Americans are consuming 2 to 5 times more protein than they need. The plant kingdom has all the protein requirements that we need to be healthy. So where do I get my protein? I get my protein in the same place all of these poor, malnourished guys get it. I get my protein in the same place these guys get it. Some of the fiercest, strongest animals on the planet are herbivores. How come nobody asks them where they get their protein? I don't know. I get it where they get it. Just lower on the food chain. Lower on the food chain. Nuts and seeds, grains, beans, legumes, and the like. Now, my whole life I've been taught beef, that's what's for dinner. Milk does a body good. And yet here I was, feeling better, performing better, and as long as I could remember, without the very foods I've been told my whole life are absolutely essential to be healthy and critical, of course, if you want to perform as an athlete. So my whole world was suddenly upside down. And after abusing myself with drugs and alcohol and horrible lifestyle habits and the window diet for so many years, in a matter of months, I felt like I had been reborn. And I was struck by the incredible resilience of the human body to heal and to adapt. And this realization led me to a question. And it was a question that would soon become an obsession. What am I truly capable of? What are the other areas of hidden, untapped potential that I'm sitting right on top of that have yet to be explored? And that question led me to the world of ultra-endurance sports, which in many ways is a fantastic template to explore untapped human potential. In 2009, I set my sights on this crazy race called Ultraman. Most of you have probably heard of what an Ironman is. Well, this Ultraman race is twice the distance, more than twice the distance of an Ironman. It's a 320 mile, not day, big in distinction, 320 mile triathlon, which over the course of 3 days, you circumnavigate the big island of Hawaii. You guys know why they call it the Big Island? Because it's super fucking big. That's why. Day one, you swim 6 miles in the ocean, and then you race your bike 90 miles. The second day, you race your bike 171 miles. And the third day, you celebrate this whole ridiculous, insane affair by running 52.4 miles, double marathon to finish where you start. I read about this race. I thought, a human being can do that? I was astonished, followed only by this idea of like, wait, people actually volunteer for this kind of suffering? I could not believe it. It's a really beautiful event. It's limited to just 35 people from all over the world, invitation only. And it was like this switch flicked. As crazy as this sounded, I just knew that my path was going to lead me to the starting line of this race. I just knew it as this spiritual being having a human experience that this was in my path. Sure enough, that's what happened in 2009. I decided that this was going to be my thing. This is what I was going to train for. I hired a coach, prepared for it. I trained very hard. And I was able to go from this chubby, window diet addicted dude into this guy. Fitter, stronger than I had ever been in my entire life, including when I was swimming in my 20s, despite being 43 years old. I will tell you this, it helps when you have a good photographer who knows how to where to put the light, get those shadows so you look all super epic. I remember you told me exhale all the air out of your lungs and go like this and you'll make your abs look good. But it's not about the physique for me. It's like this internal compass had been righted and I knew I was on the right path, this exploration of human potential. So Thanksgiving weekend 2009, I show up at this race. I jump in the ocean. When I get out of that 6-mile swim, I had a 10-minute lead on the field, and I held that lead throughout the entire day to win stage 1 of this world championship event. A 43-year-old corporate lawyer, I had no business even being there. It was astonishing, and I remember going to bed that night thinking, this plant-based diet is working out okay. I better not tell anybody what I'm doing. The second day didn't go as well. I crashed my bike. It's a long story. I banged up my knee. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to finish the race. It took me out of podium contention completely. Whether I was going to be able to run that double marathon was seriously in question, but I was able to soldier through, work my way back up the field to finish as the fastest American and 6th in the world that year. Thank you. It's not like I won the race. People ask me all the time, do you think you could have won? Do you think you could have been on the podium if you hadn't crashed? And I was like, I don't care. I didn't get in it to win or to be on podiums. I got into it to have a spiritual experience. I got into it to learn something about myself. As an athlete, when everything goes your way, you don't learn that much. It's good for the ego, but it's not a teachable moment. The teachable moment occurs when things don't go your way and you're forced to make a decision, and that decision reveals character. That's what I was looking for in this experience, and that's exactly what I got. Now, back to that original question. What are the limits of my capability? Had I reached the outer boundaries of my potential? And I had to honestly say, I don't think so. I think I have more to say and more to do in this area. So in 2010, my buddy Jason Lester and I tackled something no one had ever tried before. He called it Epic 5. In May of 2010, we attempted to redefine the limits of human endurance by tackling 5 Ironmans on 5 Hawaiian Islands in 5 days. No one had ever tried it before, sounded cool. This is my next thing. There's so many extraordinary stories that came out of this experience. I don't have time to tell you those. I'm just going to leave you with one. So this is Jason and I on day 4 on the island of Maui. We began this experience on Kauai, did the Ironman there, went to Oahu, then Molokai. Here we are on Maui, and the wheels were falling off the wagon. This is right after we had finished the 112-mile bike leg, the last 5 miles of which I was literally weeping out loud. I was so dehydrated and exhausted. I had saddle sores so bad on my rear that I couldn't sit on my seat anymore, and I was done. I was cooked. When that bike leg was over, I was like, I cannot go any further. The prospect of running a marathon that night, there was no way. It wasn't a matter of self-will. It was just a physical impossibility. I had no energy. But one of us is going to have to call it off. As you can see, Jason doesn't look so good there either. It's a game of chicken. Who's going to say, let's go back to the hotel and forget this whole ridiculous thing? As you can see right here, I'm just about to tell him. I'm just about to say, Jason, I'm done. And right at this moment, off to the side, we were in this parking lot next to this beach. We had a little ragtag group of volunteers helping us. I saw this woman walk underneath a street lamp. She had that kind of leathery skin from being in the sun too much, a teal tank top, and she was holding a bottle and she was hunched over. And she started walking over to our group kind of like this, and I was like, oh man, drunk lady, right? She surveys our group, looks us all over back and forth, and for whatever reason, I lock eyes with her, and she locks eyes with me. And she walks right up in front of me and leans over to me kind of like this, and I'm like, oh, this is the last thing I need right now. I'm trying to tell Jason we're going back to the hotel. She looks down at me and she goes, hey man, you want to party? Do I want to party? No, I don't want to party. When you're that exhausted, the slightest distraction or stimulus is like overwhelming. And I was like, please go away. I just kind of like shrugged her off and she went, like kind of like stumbled off into the darkness, and I thought, good riddance. And then I had another thought that entered my mind, and I realized that wasn't just some random drunk lady. It dawned on me that had I made just a couple decisions differently than I had in my past, that I could very easily be leading her life. That in many ways, she was I and I was her. This was not some random happenstance. This woman was like an angel who had been delivered to me at this very specific, opportune moment to remind me of how far I had come in my life from that broken soul, unable to live, hoping to die, detoxing in that rehab, to the grips of this fantastic, unbelievable adventure, this embrace of life. And as I reflected on that, I reflected on how my life had been twice saved. My thoughts turned to my grandfather, Richard Spindle, the man with whom I had shared so much in common and yet had been deprived of knowing in my life, and I felt his presence, and I knew that he was there with us on that bumper. And then I thought about an endurance colleague of mine named David Goggins, an incredible endurance athlete who has been a personal inspiration to me, and something that he had once said that has always stuck with me. And that is, when you think you're done and you can't go any further, you've actually only tapped into about 40% of what you're truly capable of. And with that, I went into this fugue state. I don't even quite remember what happened next. All I know is that Jason and I were no longer sitting on that bumper. We were walking through the night. And that walk turned into a jog, and that jog turned into a run, running through a controlled cane field burn that had the sky aglow in this crazy, surrealistic orange that made it look like a scene out of Apocalypse Now. And just before dawn broke, we finished that marathon, something I did not think was physically possible for either of us. It was unbelievable. A day later, we went over to the Big Island of Hawaii and finished that fifth and final Ironman. And when the dust settled, we had accomplished something that no one else in history had ever done. Fueled on nothing but plants, mind you. By 44, I had exceeded my wildest expectations as an athlete, but my greatest accomplishment is not athletic. My greatest accomplishment is that I healed myself, not just in body or mind, but in spirit. Truth is, I'm nobody special. I'm just an ordinary guy who happened to do something extraordinary. But if my story stands for anything, it's that change, both personal and global, isn't just possible, it is our prerogative. It is our mandate. It is our mandate to change ourselves and to be change activators for the world. Now, right now, we are in the midst of this crazy healthcare crisis. We're also in the midst of an unprecedented environmental crisis. Our system for feeding the planet, industrialized animal agriculture, factory farming, is decimating the planet. It is acidifying our oceans. It's created the greatest mass species extinction event since the dinosaurs. It's destroying the rainforests. It is polluting our water table and using up too much land, too much water. It's also contributing more greenhouse gas emissions than the entire transportation sector combined. As you heard Scott talk about last night, it's easy to feel disenfranchised. We can't make a difference with these huge problems. Our vote doesn't count. But the truth is, there are solutions. And through personal action and personal change, we can make a difference. Right now, if you swap the animal products off your plate for every meal, look at all these resources that you save. That is a profound, tactile, very real change that every single person can make with every meal that you eat. By adopting a plant-centric, plant-based approach to your plate, it is the medicine that will prevent you from becoming one of these statistics for these chronic illnesses. It is the medicine that will heal you and has the potential to heal the planet. It is the single most powerful decision that you can make as a conscious, compassionate consumer. Because the truth is, if you change your plate, it will change who you are, it will change how you are, it holds the potential to change the world, and it might, just might, even turn you into a superhero. Thank you. Thank you, guys. Yeah.